I'd like to then introduce our next speaker, Professor Aoife Daly from UCC. Aoife teaches and researches children's rights with a focus on their environmental rights and is the author of Children Autonomy. And I'm very sorry, the rest of the title of your book has been cut out from the script. But please listen to what Aoife Daly has to say. I don't think I need to say it by now, but I hope you enjoy what she has to say. Yippee.
Thank you so much, Casey, for that very kind introduction. Um, my book title is very admittedly too long, so that's understandable that it got cut up. It's children autonomy and the courts beyond the right to be heard. So I have a background in children's rights. I'm a professor of law here at University College Cork. Um, and I have always, for my whole career, written about children and the courts, children doing political action. And so it's just been incredibly exciting in the last few years to see that children have been in the courts and doing political action on climate. So that's what I'm going to tell you a little bit about today. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the backdrop to my work. I'm going to tell you about post-paternalism theory, which is basically children and youth taking their own action on a global scale for the climate, which is very transformative for children and youth rights. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Youth Climate Justice Project that I am running here at School of Law and University College Cork. So we've heard from many people this morning. I've been listening with great interest, about the harm from the climate crisis and the intergenerational unfairness of it for lots of reasons, including the fact that children on average are smaller, they are more likely to be in poverty and exploited. And so that's one reason why the climate crisis, which will make everything more acute with adverse weather events and so on, that children are most likely to suffer. Not that every child is in the same boat. Some children are much more privileged, of course, than others. So children in the global south, children from indigenous communities, children with disabilities will be the worst harmed even within that group. But also all children are in the same boat, that they are likely to live with the climate crisis much longer than older people such as myself. So there's that element to it as well. And Greta Thunberg, of course, is kind of the face of young climate action since 2018. But did you know that children and young people have been talking about environmental crises all around the world, especially children from the global south and indigenous communities, for a very long time? We've Vanessa Nakate, whose picture I have here as well, who is a young climate advocate in Uganda, and she is involved in efforts to shift schools in Uganda's fuel use to renewable energy. So lots of incredible activities going on around the world. So it's so important to note that usually, or quite often and traditionally, children and youth are seen as less competent, as still developing and not having reached, the pinnacle of being an adult. But in actual fact, here we see that turned on its head, because children and youth have lots of competence in this area of the climate crisis in lots of ways and for lots of reasons. And I've written a lot about this, like this journal article in Human Rights Law Review about the climate competence of young people. So digital media, of course, children and youth on average, better than older generations, having grown up with that. Using images on social media, and we know that kind of spark of Greta Thunberg with her lone protest, looking so lonely outside the Swedish Parliament back 6 or 7 years ago, really did catch fire around the world. And then with Fridays for Futures and other initiatives, young people started really kind of capitalizing on that and galvanizing the movement. to bring attention to the issue. But also, learning climate science in school has been, I think, a significant factor as well in young climate action and how it has been so powerful. Like some children even writing books about the climate crisis, like Arjun Marwaha in California, who wrote a book for young people about climate science and helping young people understand it. So we can see in several ways why it has been youth that have been such leaders in this space. Sorry. So my colleague Nicole Rogers in Australia has talked about how children and youth have gone from victims of the climate crisis or being perceived as victims to actually being incredibly important change makers. Like a young man said back a few years back, he said, we're so lucky to be the generation that changes the entire system. And so there's a lot of power. We heard about climate anxiety previously, but there's power in being able to do something and to actually try and make a change. And that's been experienced by children and young people. And it's not that it's never happened before. Children and youth have been very active in lots of crises around the world. Like in apartheid South Africa, we had youth marching for justice. When it comes to the horrors of the lack of gun control in the US, we saw these young people from Florida in the middle photo there, teaming up with The Guardian to interview politicians like Bernie Sanders here about gun control in the US. And even in the horrors of Israel's onslaught of Gaza, here we see down the bottom a young lady, a 9-year-old, who wanted to go about speaking to other children about their experiences and fears in that sad context. So she wanted to do some journalism. So we see all these children and young people doing quite extraordinary things. Do all of them do it? Absolutely not. Like the adult population, a small proportion of them will be particularly caring about social justice, and others will just be probably getting on with their lives. So it's not all young people, but it's these incredible segments of young people that are very, very competent and capable in their area. Is it worrying to see children and youth taking on these scary issues? And, you know, it's easy as an adult to worry about their welfare. But if you look at all of these situations, all of these children and youth are already in a situation that threatens their welfare. And like the quote from that young man in the earlier slide, at least they're taking action and doing something. We heard earlier from John about anxiety and climate anxiety, and at least taking some action allows children and young people to combat anxiety somewhat. So that's why I felt, okay, we have been quite paternalist with young people, just worrying about their safety and, seeing them as victims. But now I feel we're a bit post that, we're a bit past that, because of, like I mentioned, we have this grassroots action. They're not doing what adults tell them. They're not waiting for adults to help them. They're actually taking their own action. For the first time on a global scale, because we've seen that they've been doing it in individual situations, but here it's such a global movement, rather than us adults kind of telling them their rights or giving them their rights. And my area of expertise is the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it is an instrument that every country in the world, except for the US, but that's another conversation altogether, but every other country in the world has signed up and agreed to implement basic human rights for children. And it contains 42 substantive rights. You'll see there. 42 substantive rights across the spectrum. So, civil and political rights, which ironically the US managed to get into that instrument that I was very interested in. You'll see here Article 15, the right to freedom of assembly and association. Article 16, the right to privacy. Article 17, the right to information, along with more economic rights, such as you'll see Article 26 there, the right to help from the government if you need it financially, the right to health there in Article 24. So there's this amazing spectrum of rights in that instrument. So what I'm going to do now is just ask you to briefly think, what do you think of these rights are most relevant to the environment and to the climate crisis? Can you see their rights that you think might be relevant? And just pop them in the chat for me. So if you to pick your top 3 of these lovely, colorful rights that every state in the world, except the US, has signed up to, what would they be? Because I would love to have a look in a minute at what you think. So you can see them all laid out there. Article 2 is freedom from discrimination. Article 3 is the principle of the best interests of the child, that governments have to consider children's interests in everything that they do. We've Article 6, the right to life and also survival and development. Article 7 is you have a right to your name and nationality. Article 8, you have a right to your identity. Article 9, you have a right to be with your family if you can. So it's quite an incredible instrument. But the thing about it is that it does have this spectacular right to be heard for children, which was put in there because it was, even though this reflects all the rights already in other instruments, it also sought to have special rights for children. And children don't get heard in a lot of spaces. Children under 18s don't usually have the right to vote, for example, which is a huge democratic gap where, why would politicians be pressured to do stuff for children when this group doesn't even have the right to vote? And Article 12 says that children have a right to be heard in all matters affecting them, and the right for their views to be given due weight is the language used. And it's quite spectacular in a lot of ways. There's children's parliaments now, has been set up all over the world where children are heard that way. But in other ways, it's quite a problem because it maybe gives the impression that it's okay, children have the right to be heard, so we're all fine. But there's a lot of paternalism about it. So paternalism is restricting the freedoms of others while you're saying you're doing it all for their good, whether that's true or not. And we see a lot of gatekeeping around who's heard, like who sets up the space to be heard, who decides, okay, we'll have a youth parliament or whatever other arena we're in. If it's a child whose interests are in court, there's all kinds of barriers to being at maybe the judge hearing the child, which as I said, I've written a whole book about that, but so I won't go into that today. But really, it's adults that decide which children can participate, when, where. So you could say that there's a lot of paternalism in that, and that's why I'm arguing that we have come to a post-paternalist area. And that little quote there down the bottom from Pantazidou, where he talks about grassroots movements of human rights. Generally, he's just talking about people that are doing human rights stuff. And he's saying that this grassroots movement creates meaning. It shapes the narrative around what's a just claim. Who has the right to have rights, basically? And I think that's what's happening with child and youth action, that it's a grassroots movement. It's children and youth saying, we have rights. We have the right to a healthy future. We have the right to a healthy environment. And and I loved the way, I think it was Katie this morning, pointed to Brown Weiss's intergenerational equity point, that every generation should leave the world to the next generation in as good or better shape as they found it, basically, is what that is. And children are saying, we deserve that. And they're pushing the agenda in terms of that. So it's very exciting. But it's also very disruptive. There's unexpected things there. Like there's a lot of anger towards adults from children and youth. Like Greta Thunberg saying, we will not let you get away with this. And rightly so. there should be anger, as John pointed out earlier. Um, we have this incredible phenomenon of children and youth now taking cases to the courts, like the Saki petition to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, where the committee found that it was a good point in some cases. Children and youth could be victims where states are not curbing the climate crisis, but the committee said, you have not gone through your national courts yet, so we cannot hear your petition. And the children and youth were very angry and very annoyed about this. And they said, we feel extremely alone by the Committee on the Rights of the Child. So the rights systems that are there to help children and youth, many of them feel that's not happening. And again, I've written all about this in Netherlands Quarterly of Human Rights. I do a lot of writing. I write and write and write. I try to get all my thoughts down on paper. So if you want to follow up on that, you can have a little Google of that. And also, I have identified that the children's rights is not used very much in climate cases, which is extraordinary because we have now 100 cases around the world that are involving children and youth as parties. So why on earth is there no children's rights in the vast majority of those cases? So many reasons. Again, that's another day's work, but one important point is that the rights of future generations is in a lot of national constitutions, even though there are people that aren't here yet, is the usual definition of it. That seems to be preferred to children's actual own rights now. And we know that children's rights are being affected now. Like in that Saki petition, there were so many, 16 children pointing to how it's affecting them right now, like Carl Smith, a young man from Alaska, from an indigenous background, whose way of life, tracking caribou and so on, is being destroyed by the melting ice sheets. So we know children are being harmed right now from floods and heat waves and all kinds of things, and yet children's own rights are not turning up a lot in these cases. It really is a real bugbear of mine as to why that's happening. So that's where I came in a couple of years ago. I applied to the EU for a European Research Council grant to map and track all this and try and bring to life my idea that we're in a post-paternalist time because of child and youth grassroots action, organizing together, and that children's rights is changed by this. I'm not quite sure exactly how. I want to find it out, and I want to talk to a lot of children and youth while I do that. So my idea is there's all of this disruption going on with youth action and children's rights. I have my post-paternalist theory. I want to bring together all of these disciplines, and I've set up a team now. My application was successful, by the way. Yay! So it's already running. We're a year into the 5-year project, and I have amazing staff from backgrounds across health, anthropology, childhood studies, and we're together trying to develop our theory and blast through that barrier where children are seen as victims and needed protection and adults are in charge, to a more transformative time where we're rethinking children's rights. Children are demanding equality. Children are demanding that they're allies with us. And we are on the road to doing some exciting stuff. We are writing already and working with children and youth. We have this fabulous youth advisory team from 12 countries all over the world that advise us in everything that we do. We're working with lawyers to talk about the cases. We have this database. We have a network that you can join, and we have so many events going on. We just had a big conference there 2 weeks ago to bring people together to talk about youth climate justice. And General Comment number 26 of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, which lays out so many rights to do with the right to health, is a part of our work too. And Michelle, I might ask you, well, actually, I'll just finish up and then I'll ask you to play the video telling about our project. But just to finish up, we do have this case law database that we've put together. that you can go and have a look at there, where you can find all of, well, almost all, we're still kind of building it up, but almost all of the child and youth related cases on environmental justice. And you can search for things like future generations. You can see what age the children were and all these kind of things. We're very proud of it. We just set it up. So have a look. And similarly, that QR code will take you onto our website, and you can also join our network if you want to and find out about what we're up to, what other people are doing in the world, what climate cases are going on. And we have written a lot by now about our post-paternalism theory and what it involves, but I don't want to take up much time. And I know that my colleague, the wonderful Niamh, is going to talk to you next, and Niamh has been so helpful for this project as well. But I'll leave it there and just let Michelle play a little video about our project, and do get in touch if you would like to be involved in here. I'll leave you with some pictures of the launch of our project a few months back, with wonderful young people from all over Cork telling us their ideas about youth climate action and human rights. Thank you so much.
On the Rights of the Child is a very important document which lists the things that every child across the world needs to grow up happy, healthy, and safe, such as the right to have a say and be taken seriously by adults, the right to education, the right to health, even the right to play.
Governments in almost every country across the world have agreed on and signed up to this convention, promising to make children's rights real.
With environmental issues and climate change affecting children's life every day across the world, the convention is ever more important. Children have the right to a clean, healthy environment. Governments have the responsibility to make decisions that will mean children today and children in the future can experience their rights.
For a long time, children and young people have recognized that governments are not doing enough to protect their rights. All across the world, children and young people are continuing to come together to tell adults in power what they need for their rights. They are also leading the way by taking climate action themselves. From protesting in the streets, speaking to governments and parliaments, and even taking court cases to try to stop climate change.
We certainly live in a very different world today than when the convention was written in 1989, and we need to better understand what children's leading role in climate action means for children's rights and climate justice. This is what our research project called Youth Climate Justice sets out to do.
Led by Professor Aoife Daly, we're exploring the different ways children are coming together around the world to stand up for and lead climate action.
We want to understand what children think about their rights, the environment, and climate change.
We are looking at examples where children and young people have been involved in court cases about climate change or taking action in their local communities to help the environment.
We are funded by the European Union and based at the University College Cork in Ireland, although the researchers in our team are from all over the world. We also have many great advisors supporting us along the way, including children from different parts of the world.
So what we hope to find out? By the end of our research, we will better understand how to make the courts more child-friendly so children can access climate justice. We will also understand what children's leading role in climate action means for children's rights today and in the future. We hope you can join us on this journey.